All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you for joining us for today's Terralex Presents, what you need to know about the new UK-ETA and EU-ETIAS entry requirements. That's a lot of letters for our speakers to unpack. For those of you who are not familiar, Terralex is a global network of independent law firms committed to serving clients' legal needs and business interests around the world. Our speakers today include Terralex members Elaine McIlroy from Brodie's in Scotland and Keith Grima from Fenech Fenech in Malta. I'm going to ask our speakers to further introduce themselves in a moment. In the meantime, we do encourage questions, so please feel free to add those to the Q&A module on your Zoom dashboard. And for those of you joining us today who are Terralex members, this is really valuable information to have as we look to our next global meeting in Amsterdam in June and potential requirements for that. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our speakers. Elaine?
Thanks very much, Nicole, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining this session. As Nicole said, I'm a partner in immigration law at Brodie's, which is a UK law firm, and today we're going to talk about a couple of recent and forthcoming developments in immigration law, one impacting the UK, which I'm going to speak about in the first part of the session, and then Keith is going to talk about a similar development in the EU in the second part of the session, and we'll have some time for questions towards the end. And if we just turn to the first slide, that would be great. So today, my part of the session is about, the UK's Electronic Travel Authorisation Scheme, otherwise known as ETA, and it opened for applications just last month. So hopefully now is a really good time to look at what the scheme is, how it works, and what employers and businesses need to know about it if they're planning to send non-British and non-Irish nationals to the UK for business trips or other purposes. So, ETA, the clue is in the name. It's an electronic travel authorisation. It's permission to travel rather than permission to enter the UK, and there is an important difference there. So just because you're granted permission to travel doesn't mean you'll automatically get entry into the UK. They'll still look at those requirements when you arrive at the border. But it's similar to the US-ETIAS scheme, and other countries like Canada and Australia have got similar schemes. For many years, certain nationals then have not needed any sort of paperwork or permission before coming to the UK, and we call those people non-visa nationals. So certain countries have always had to have a visa to visit the UK, but others didn't. And it's those non-visa nationals that are largely impacted by these changes. So before, people could just check in for a flight and arrive in the UK with no paperwork, and provided they met the entry requirements as a visitor, they didn't need to do anything. So this change is important in terms of businesses raising awareness with individuals who travel for work purposes, so they know that they do need to apply for this in advance. In the worst case, if individuals forgot to apply or did it too late in the day, that could cause issues in terms of delays or cancelled business trips in the worst case. But having said that, the Home Office, which is the part of the UK administration that deals with immigration matters, say that they expect the process to be straightforward for most people. And as we go through, we'll look at how people apply, usually using an app, or there's an online application process through a website. But in terms of who needs an ETA, so British and Irish passport holders don't need one. Also, those who already have a visa for the UK don't need one. So if somebody's got a work visa or other type of visa for the UK, they don't need one. But for anyone else coming to the UK as a visitor for up to 6 months, even transit visitors or people coming under what's known as the creative worker concession for up to 3 months, they will all need an ETA in order to travel to the UK. And you do need to have that before you check in. Every traveller needs one, so even children and babies, and it is needed to check into the flight. So you must apply before you travel. But once you've been granted it, it is valid for multiple journeys. You don't need to do it on every occasion you travel, so it will be valid for a 2-year period, or until your passport expires if that's at a sooner date, in which case you need to get another one. And it's important to note for those who've got more than one passport or nationality, you do need to travel on the same passport as you used for your ETA application. So if we just turn to the next slide, in terms of which nationalities are impacted by the changes, it's those countries, as I said, that are known as non-visa nationals. So they're considered to be kind of lower risk countries, but that broadly includes European Union countries, apart from Ireland. As I said, if you've got an Irish passport, you don't need to apply for one. It includes the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, so including Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. It also includes nationals from the USA, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Israel, Mexico, and the other countries up there. So anyone who's not needed a visa typically to come to the UK will need to apply for one. If we then turn to the next slide, one question we're asked, of course, is when the scheme applies from. So it opened last month, as I said, for applications, and the first set of people that have to apply are Qatari nationals. So they're rolling the scheme out in phases for different nationalities. So for anyone from Qatar planning to travel to the UK from the 15th of November onwards, they need to apply for an ETA. Then from February next year, nationals from Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Saudi, and UAE will need to apply for them. And then further rollout dates for additional nationalities will then be announced in due course. And it's expected that all of those nationalities will fall under the scheme by the end of 2024. So it's being done in stages, partly to check that it is effective and to allow the authorities to be able to sort of cope with the new applications that they're going to have to process. If we just move on to the next slide then, in terms of how to apply then, there is an app, and the app's supposed to be the sort of easiest way to apply. That app allows you to scan your passport if it's got a chip in it, take a selfie, provide some personal information such as dates of birth, etc., details of your nationality, immigration history, and ask questions on criminal convictions, etc. You don't need travel dates in order to make the application using the app. You can also apply using the gov.uk website instead, and it says if it's someone other than the individual applying, then you should do that through the website. The cost is £10 per applicant, so it's not really high cost, but that will cover some of the administration costs of running the scheme. And therefore, in order to apply online, you do need some kind of credit card, debit card, or also deals with Apple or Google Pay as well. Most applicants will receive a response within 3 working days, so it's a pretty quick turnaround. Some people will hear earlier than that. And there'll be some Home Office checks that are carried out in the background before a decision's made. In some cases, it says that applications could take longer if further checks are required. So it makes sense for people to apply sooner rather than later, not to leave it sort of 3 days before you're due to travel, just in case the application takes longer. So doing it in advance makes sense. Once submitted, it's not possible to amend or withdraw an application. You need to wait for the result to come through. And once you get it, the ETA will be digitally linked to your passport. So you won't be issued with a separate sort of document or something proving that you've got it. But the airline, for example, will know that you've got it because it is linked to your passport. And that's why it's important to travel on the same passport as you use to apply. UK Visas and Immigration do say you can print, if you want, a copy of your confirmation email confirming that you have applied, and it might make sense to carry that as an extra sort of safety check just in case there's some issue with the technology. But yes, in theory, it should be a digital permission that they can find out if you've got it or not through sort of scanning your passport. So the question arises then about what if it's refused, if somebody makes an application and it's not granted straight away. There is no appeal process or administrative review process for this. Instead, the individual is directed to apply for a visa. So individuals who wouldn't normally need a visa to come to the UK as a visitor, like an American citizen or Canadian, for example, would then go on to make a visa application. And that's for a standard visitor visa if they were coming for a business trip, for example. There's a process for that whereby the individual makes an online application, they pay a fee, which is currently £115 for a 6-month visit visa. They would submit paperwork, sort of supportive of the, I guess, explaining the reason for the trip, how long they're coming for, who's paying for it, etc. And then it usually takes the immigration authorities about 3 weeks to process a visa application like that, if it's for a visit visa. But word of warning that it can take longer in some cases. And in the last couple of years, we've had periods where those applications have taken more like 6 weeks or even longer in some cases. And for that reason, if you do know that you're going to need an ETA or one of your employees is going to be traveling to the UK for business purposes, it does make sense to make the ETA application early days so that if you need to do this backup of a visa process, you're not running up against any sort of time limits. And it's also worth saying that if there was a problem with the ETA application in the first place, it's also possible that you might either be refused a visa or have an issue with it, whereby they might come back and ask more questions, etc. So factoring in plenty of time for that is important. We just move on to the next slide. So just briefly, some grounds for refusal. I guess people are interested in knowing why somebody might not have a straightforward application or why they might be refused. That can be refused on criminality grounds, if they decide that allowing the person to travel isn't conducive to the public good. There's terrorist and extremism sort of grounds for refusal. If somebody had previously breached UK immigration laws or overstayed under a visa, if they'd made false representations, or if they'd failed to pay litigation costs to the Home Office, for example. So any sort of adverse history like that might flag up to you that you may have a problem with it, in which case, again, allowing plenty of time and maybe even taking advice in that kind of case would be a sensible idea. We just move on to the final bit. Criminal record grounds, I've just put up onto the slide there what the rules say about that. So custodial sentences of 12 months or more are likely to be an issue, even if they're a bit dated. And also more minor criminal offences can also make a difference if they're more recent or if there's persistent ones. However, minor misdemeanours like parking offences, etc., are not likely to be a problem. And again, if there's any issues in relation to that, it's sensible probably to take advice. So just finishing up with some takeaways then before I hand over to Keith. So as I said, the ETA is just permission to travel. It doesn't mean you're automatically going to get granted entry to the UK. So you still do need to think about whether the person is a legitimate business visitor coming for one of the grounds that are permitted for business trips. And lots of people do take advice on that and carry with them a letter explaining the purpose of the business visit. So it shouldn't replace those normal safeguards. It's just an additional permission to travel. And if we just move on to the next slide, I've got some more takeaways there. Planning ahead, and this is probably the best one. So if you've got an employee going on a business trip, best to apply early so that if there is an issue, you've got plenty of time to deal with it. You've got time to apply for that visit visa if necessary. And the risk is that it could take longer if you have any issues to resolve it. Raising staff awareness of the scheme is also important. If people just show up to the airport or think about it 2 days before they're due to travel, they might have a problem because people from all of those nationalities that I mentioned haven't had to have any paperwork to come to the UK. They might just not know about it. So awareness raising is important, and the Home Office, our immigration department, has been trying to do lots of education with employers and other organisations so that people don't get surprised by it. And then finally, do seek legal advice if you've got an employee who does have some sort of adverse immigration history or criminal record, etc. So I'll just pass over to Keith at this point to cover the EU scheme instead.
Great. Thanks, Elaine. Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Grima. I'm an associate at Fenech Fenech Advocates in Malta. I form part of the tax and immigration law team. Basically, I'm going to run you through the EU, European Travel Information and Authorization System, the ETIAS, which is quite a mouthful. Basically, it is similar to the UK ETA, which Elaine has just briefly explained. and to the US ESTA, for example, as well. So it is something similar to those. And I'll just start off with briefly the main aims of the regulations. Basically, the European Commission announced the ETIAS in 2016, so quite a while back now, and the ETIAS regulations were introduced in 2018. Basically, they introduced a new travel authorization system for specifically to third country nationals who are not required to obtain a Schengen visa to travel to the Schengen area. Basically, third country nationals obviously will still travel to the Schengen area visa-free, but they will now need to go through this added step to obtain the travel authorization. The three main issues or risks rather that the regulations try to cater for are the security risks, illegal immigration risks, and high epidemic risks. So basically, it's creating safeguards against these kind of risks, and also to tackle terrorist offenses and other serious criminal offenses. The aim also of the European Commission here is to increase efficiency in external border crossing points, since basically through the introduction of the travel authorization system, individuals falling within scope will be screened or checked prior to arriving at the external border crossing point. So obviously there will be an increase in efficiency there. So despite the ETIAS regulations being introduced in 2018, the ETIAS travel authorization system hasn't been implemented yet. It was, up until a few weeks ago, planned to be introduced over the coming year. However, the European Commission has now communicated that there is a delay in the implementation, a further delay, and it's anticipated that the ETIAS will be implemented in 2025. Okay, so basically, as I've touched upon already, the ETIAS regulations apply mainly to third country nationals who are exempt from Schengen visa requirements and who are traveling for intended stays in the Schengen area for short stays. So basically the 90 days in any 180-day periods. There are other individuals in specific scenarios who would fall within scope of these regulations. Mainly, these are individuals, for example, who are holders of local border traffic permits, school pupils on school excursions, but these are very specific ones. So, but mainly it caters for third country nationals, as we've said, who are exempt from Schengen visa requirements. There are individuals who are specifically excluded from the scope of the ETIAS. Obviously, the main ones are nationals of countries who do require a visa to travel to European countries, and obviously EU and EEA nationals, since obviously they can travel freely within the European Union. UK nationals who benefit under the EU-UK withdrawal agreement are also specifically excluded. So, for example, if UK nationals hold a residence permit to reside in one of the EU member states, they would be specifically excluded. There's also a specific exclusion to third country nationals who are family members of EU nationals or third country nationals who have the right of free movement, who hold also a residence card to reside in the EU, in the Schengen area rather. And there are also specific nationals of Andorra, Monaco, San Marino, or Ireland who are excluded, and also individuals who hold Vatican City state passports, basically, amongst other specific exclusions. Running through the application process briefly, similar to the UK-ETA, as Elaine was explaining, the application may be submitted online either through a dedicated website or through a mobile app. Some basic information will be required, obviously, as part of the application, mainly brief or basic personal information and contact details, travel document information. So, for example, if you're using the passport to apply, obviously the passport details there. information on your education level, so very brief, just your education level. I'm not going into detail, and the occupational sector you work in. The member state of first intended stay also needs to be indicated, although the Commission, through its guidelines, has explained that obviously it is understanding of the fact that you may plan to first stay in one member state, but obviously plans may be subject to change, and you may end up first traveling to another member state, and this wouldn't affect the travel authorization. And also there are 3 background questions concerning criminal history, traveler history, and immigration history, which obviously one would need to answer to. Interestingly, third parties may submit applications on behalf of third country nationals, so including third party entities who may offer this as a service. There is a minimal application cost similar to the UK-ETA, which is of €7, which obviously covers administrative fees. But there are specific waivers for the fees to individuals who are under 18 and over 70 years of age at the time of the application, and also to family members of EU nationals or third country nationals who have a right to free movement. So the fee is waived in those scenarios. Basically, the travel authorization, the application will be processed automatically through electronic means. The Commission expects that a decision will be communicated within minutes, although there is a time frame up to 96 hours within which one would expect the decision to be communicated. Basically, during the processing, the automated system will compare the information provided by the applicant against EU information systems, like the Schengen information system, visa systems, Interpol and Europol data, and the ETIAS watch list and other risk indicators. And basically, if no hits arise, travel authorization will be issued. The travel authorization will be valid for up to 3 years, and it will be directly related to the travel document used for the application. It will be issued for 3 years, and it will be valid either up until those 3 years, or else if the travel document expires beforehand, which is a further application would need to be submitted to obtain a further travel authorization linked to the new travel document. Should hits arise, the application will then be manually processed rather than electronically through the ETIAS central unit and the ETIAS national units, which are basically units in each member state applying the ETIAS basically, and obviously the applicant will be notified accordingly. Further documentation or information may be requested at this stage if hits arise, and in exceptional cases, the applicant may be asked to attend an interview. Obviously, the timeframes mentioned earlier would be extended here. So, as Elaine explained with respect to the UK-ETA, it is essential that one applies well in advance of their planned trip. In case of refusal, the applicant will be obviously notified of the refusal, a reason will be given, and the member state which refused the application will be indicated on this notification. There is a right to appeal a refusal of the application, and the appeal would need to be submitted to and will be heard by the member state of refusal, obviously according to their own laws. Some grounds of refusals, some grounds of refusal, some grounds basically why an application may be refused are the following. So the first one, or obviously, and the most obvious one, is if a travel document you're using to apply was reported as lost, stolen, misappropriated, or was invalidated for some reason or another. Second would be if through this automated system and through the comparison with the risk factors, you have been considered to pose a security, illegal immigration, or high epidemic risk. So obviously the main risks which the system is intending to cater for. If one fails to reply to a request for additional information or to sit for an interview, the application may also be refused on that basis. The application may also be refused if one has been refused entry in any other country, accompanied by an alert in the relevant information system. So, for example, in the Schengen information system. And applications may also be refused if there are doubts, again, through these specific risk indicators about the reliability and veracity of the data provided by the applicant in his or her application. Some effects which the introduction of the ETIAS may have on business travel and travel generally, obviously, is the fact that this will now be an added step which one needs to undertake before traveling, obviously, compared to the situation as it currently stands when traveling to the Schengen area, where obviously there are no such applications for travel authorization. Obviously, individuals would need to become aware and take time to learn about these requirements and obviously to comply with them. Obviously, one would need to source any information to submit the application beforehand. Once the travel authorization is indeed obtained, the holder would need to ensure that it is indeed valid every time one travels to the Schengen area. And obviously, it may be an added burden on large organizations who would need to ensure that there is compliance across the whole organization in relation to this travel authorization, basically. So that brings me to a close to my presentation on the ETIAS, and myself and Elaine will be taking on any questions you may have concerning both travel authorization systems.
I think we've just got a couple of minutes for questions. I've got one here for you, Keith, if that's okay. I guess the UK scheme was going to be rolled out in stages to different nationalities, so bit by bit. Do you know if the EU plans to do the same, or if it's just going to apply to everybody at once?
Mm-hmm. So, based on the information available at this time, we understand that it will be implemented as a whole, so it will not be staggered like the UK one. So we understand that yes, it will apply to all the visa-exempt third country nationals at one go, unless obviously things change in the interim. As I explained previously, there have been some delays, so this may potentially be something the Commission may consider to at least start implementing it block by block, maybe, or piece by piece, so at least it's moved forward.
Sure. And do you have any questions there?
Obviously, I wanted to ask if there's, since it's a kind of a difference between the UK and the EU travel authorization system, wanted to ask if there is any specific reasoning or thinking behind not allowing an applicant to appeal a decision. If I understood correctly, there is no appeal for a refusal of a decision.
Yeah, I don't know the exact rationale for that. I just know that, yeah, the next step if you get refused is to go ahead and apply for the visit visa instead. So it's not the exact same process as an appeal as such, but it's a different process whereby you'll submit lots of paperwork, pay a fee, etc., and they'll get to consider the application in kind of more detail. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what the rationale is. It's obviously different.
Potentially, it might be obviously to reduce administrative burdens on the government authorities or their systems, potentially.
Possibly, and yeah, they've already got a process set up for visit visas, so maybe that was just seen to be a kind of easier way to do it.
So,
I don't know if there's any other questions come through, Nicole.
Yeah, there's a question that was submitted. It says, when will the ETIAS become effective? So Keith, I think that's for you.
Yep. So basically, as I've explained previously, it was intended to be introduced over the course of 2024, although no specific time frame was ever given. Up until recently, there were media reports that it was delayed, but there was no confirmation from the EU Commission. However, recently, the European Commission, in terms of their FAQs and guidelines, have confirmed that it will potentially be introduced in 2025, potentially looking at mid-2025. But again, no clear dates on when it will be applied.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank Elaine and Keith for taking the time to share this information with us, and for those of you who participated. The program was recorded and will be available in case you have colleagues or contacts who would like access to it. With that, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah.